Dawud Sayatkalu. Film script. Dawud C. Itguli at outlook.com. Dawud C. Itguli at gmail.com. Detective. Thriller. Present time. City. 7 men and 1 woman rob a bank. An investigator and his partner lead the case. 3 times the police track down the robbers, and 3 times they escape at the last moment. In the end, they are captured. Nat. Garage. Evening. The garage doors slid open. People appeared in the depths of the garage, walking one after another. John. The blue-eyed boy pulled back the slide of his nickel-plated Colt .38. Mary. Next. The fair-haired woman, taking a magazine from her belt, stuck it into the socket of her Uzi. Lee. Next. A Chinese man, walking, holding a short rifle with a scope in his lowered hand. Arthur. The guy with his collar up picked up the Kalashnikov and put it on his shoulder. Punishment. A dark-skinned man carried a large leather bag slung over his shoulder. In his hand, lowered to the floor, he held a large-caliber black pistol. Scythian. The last man was a long-haired brunette with a police python in his hand. He thrust his arm forward and pulled the heavy weapon sharply, the bolt jerking back from its inertia and the cartridge sliding into place. The guy in the jacket got behind the wheel and slammed the door behind him. The rest sat down in their places nearby, closing the doors behind them. A massive black Jeep with tinted windows drove towards the city. The garage doors slid down smoothly. Int. Bank. Evening. Bank before closing. Central Hall. There are 7 to 8 people in line at the checkout. The elderly woman paid and headed towards the exit. Eva, who was about 35 years old and stood next in line, stood at the checkout counter and opened her purse. Eve. Oh my God, I forgot the receipt on the table. Sorry. I live just across the street from here. I'll go home now. The cashier nodded with understanding, accustomed to the confusion and forgetfulness of customers. Eva turned and walked towards the chairs at the end of the room. A 35-year-old man approached her husband, who was sitting with his 9-year-old daughter. He tried to stand up as she approached. She waved her hand, indicating that he should sit back down. Eve. Wait for me here, I forgot the receipt, I'll go home. Husband. It's good only for a short time. Sitting back down. Husband. We still need to go to the store. Looking at the clock. Husband. Okay. She hurriedly, with quick steps, headed towards the exit. The glass doors of the bank closed. Nat. Jeep. Evening. A Jeep pulled up to the bank and stopped at the entrance. The driver behind the wheel put black stockings on his head. The rear doors opened and armed men in dark clothes with black stockings pulled over their heads began to emerge from the car. The driver got out of the car, slamming the door. He headed toward the bank, pulling a black box from his pocket, and joined the others last. 6 men in dark leather clothing, wearing black stockings pulled over their heads, entered the bank's glass doors along the sidewalk, past pedestrians. The pedestrians glanced at the masked men in surprise and continued walking, looking back. The last guy attached the box to the outside of the bank, pressed the button, and walked through the doors. A bright red light on the box lit up, blinking. He, entering the bank doors, turned over the card with the inscription. Closed the doors, inserting the crossbar across. People in black masks appeared in the hall. 6 people, walking one after another and holding weapons in their outstretched arms, opened fire over the heads of bank employees and visitors. The guy walking ahead blocked the people walking behind him. It seemed like there was only one person walking. Only the arms were visible, spread out to the sides with weapons clenched in their hands. A hail of bullets and the crackle of gunfire. The glass shattered from the bullets, leaving behind gifts. Small caliber bullets left holes through and through. People fell to the floor without waiting for anyone's command. The man hugged his daughter and, falling to the floor, pressed her to himself. The officers were caught under their seats after pressing the buttons to signal the police department. Bank security. A uniformed female security guard, walking down the hall, fell to the floor, covering her head with her hands. Sheets of paper scattered across the floor. A 30-year-old man, caught off guard, jumped out of a glass booth at the end of the hall, dressed in a half-police uniform. He pulled a TT pistol from its holster and aimed at the first of the men. Everything suddenly became quiet. The guy in front stopped, aiming his gun at the guard. The others froze in the positions he'd stopped them in. They stood facing each other, guns in hand. Security guard. "Drop your weapons!" Shouted loudly and confidently. Shot. The guy fired a pistol, wounding the guard in the shoulder. He was holding an ultrasound in his left hand. The guard dropped the TT from his thrown-away hand and fell to the floor. The pistol flew to the side and remained lying on the floor. The guard, holding his shoulder, crawled behind the nearest cash register partition. He crawled around the corner and, turning onto his back, leaned against the wall. The guy who had fired the shot glanced over the partition, tearing his gaze away from the pistol lying on the floor to the side. He walked towards the partition. The scraping of glass on the floor. Feet. The masked man walked behind the counter and stopped in front of the security guard, who was holding his right shoulder with his hand. He was breathing deeply and nervously. He raised his pistol and aimed at his chest. The guard stared into the tiny hole in the pistol, his eyes wide with fear. The guy pulled the trigger. The guard jerked and, dropping his head onto his chest, fell silent. The guy lowered his weapon, looking at the lifeless body. International Police. Evening. Ilya walks down the corridor of the police station. He turns into the office, holding a small stack of papers. Police officers are scurrying around. Ilya raises his hand in greeting to someone at the end of the corridor and enters his office. The doors are closing. It is written, "Criminal Police Investigator." In the office. Ilya, passing by the table at which Alex was sitting typing, threw a pile of papers on the table. "Ilya. This is for you." He looked up at his boss and continued typing. Ilya walked to his desk and sat down in the chair. He looked around, ran his eyes over the desk, and pulled out a drawer. He took some papers from the drawer and placed them in front of him. He began leafing through them, occasionally reading. The intercom beeped. Ilya, continuing to read, pressed the button. "Duty. Chief, robbery on Bank Street." Ilya raised his head, looking ahead. Alex stopped typing and froze in place. Ilya rose from his seat, leaning on the table. "Ilya. When did the signal come in?" He stood, looking at the intercom. "Duty. Just now." Alex pulled a holster with a pistol from the table and put it on himself. Ilya walked out, drawing his pistol as he went. He checked the magazine and then snapped it back into place. Alex, taking his jacket off the back of a chair, followed his boss. The doors closed. They run along the corridor towards the exit. On the way, several people are already running towards the exit. Running past the entrance near the duty officer, Ilya shouted. "Ilya. Where is Max?" "Duty. I already called, he will be here soon." "Ilya. Let him take the group and go there. We'll be there." Ilya runs out into the street, Alex following. He nods his head as he runs. Street. Ilya and Alex ran out into the street. They ran up to a dark green BMW with its siren blaring and jumped in. Ilya got behind the wheel. The group of police officers ran separately to their cars. The BMW jerked forward, backing up. Ilya drove out onto the street. Int. Hall in the bank. Evening. People in masks took up firing positions in different positions and places. Ivan. Lie down and don't move. This is robbery. A man lying on the floor near the checkout was chained to a radiator. The other 3 men were handcuffed and placed on the floor. One, seeing a woman in a police uniform lying on the floor, stopped his gaze on her. Fits. Shoes. She looks on, lying on the floor, seeing only shoes. The masked guy squats down, holding a gun in his hand. She doesn't move, stunned and frightened. The guy reaches up and takes a pistol from the holster on his hip. He lifts me by the chin with the same pistol TT, and looks into my eyes. They look at each other. Nat. Street. Evening. A green BMW with a siren on the roof is racing at great speed, overtaking oncoming cars. Jumps through a red light and continues driving. Police cars with officers are speeding nearby. The squeal and grinding of tires when turning. Turn around the intersection. The howl and sound of sirens died away as the cars moved away. Pedestrians pause, look back, and move on. Inside the bank. Evening. Everyone is lying on the floor. One of the masked guys fires a couple of shots at the castle. On the second shot the lock breaks. A masked guy opens the door and walks inside. The others follow. One remains in the hall with a machine gun in his hand, the others go to the door leading to the inner premises of the bank. The doors closed behind them. Nat. In front of the bank. Evening. Police cars are rushing towards the bank from different ends, filling the area with howls and flashing lights. The streets were lit up by flashes of cameras. Sirens wailed. A police BMW stopped right in front of the bank. Ilya and Alex got out of the car. A policeman in uniform ran up to Ilya, pointed at his men and said, "Traffic policeman. We're blocking the street." Ilya. "Let's." Ilya nodded to him. They stopped in the center of the ongoing preparations and began to watch the well-coordinated work of the police. Another group of police officers blocked the highway at both ends. A black bus with a red stripe pulled up. People in camouflage uniforms, wearing bulletproof vests and helmets protected by glass bulletproof visors began to jump out of it. About 30 people surrounded the bank in a semicircle. Max stopped one and pointed to the opposite roof. He nodded and, taking two of them with sniper rifles, disappeared. The bank was cordoned off by cars and a police cordon. The crowd of onlookers was pushed to the ends of the street. Only police and military personnel remained. Max, having finished his business, approached Ilya. "Max. We are ready." Ilya. "Fine." Ilya, Alex, and Max began to look at the bank window, in which there was no noise or movement. Elevator in the bank. Evening. At the end of the corridor, doors opened and 4 armed men in masks appeared. They walked towards the elevator. The elevator doors open, and a young, thin guy of about 25 steps out. He stops as he steps out, looking at the masked men walking toward him. The first one walking raises his pistol and, continuing to walk, aims at him. He raised his hands up in surprise and stood rooted to the spot. They come close to him. The one who was aiming approached, pressed the elevator button and the doors opened. The rest stop nearby. The guy with the gun points at the elevator and orders them to enter. The guy, dumbfounded and not fully comprehending what's happening, looks at them and enters the elevator. The others follow. The guy's face, only now realizing what was going on, recovering from the shock, shows concern and worry. The elevator doors close. A guy in a mask presses the elevator button. The elevator starts moving. 4 people stand like frozen statues. The guy looks up and then quickly looks down. Suddenly he develops a nervous tic. He starts shaking his head, turning pale. His knees tremble slightly. The guy can barely stand, his whole body almost shaking. They reach the storage basement. There's a jolt and the elevator stops. Nat. Eva. Evening. Across the road, from the opposite side of the street, a woman emerges from an alley and walks towards the bank. On the sidewalk. Taking away the silent flashing of police sirens and the crowd of onlookers and police officers surrounding the entrance to the bank. She became wary and worried. Her face took on a worried expression, and she quickened her pace, and then ran, in high heels, clicking on the concrete slabs of the sidewalk. She ran up and grabbed one of the people standing in the crowd by the shoulder. He turned to her, puzzled, looking at the strange woman in surprise. She, holding hands with the man and looking over their heads, asked through the crowd. "Eve. What's happening?" He replied, turning towards the bank. "Passerby. Bank robbery." Eva glanced at the police cordon. She looked towards the bank. "Eve. Oh my God, Vanya." She uttered her husband's name. Suddenly, she broke into a run, running through the crowd. She slipped between two police officers, who had some space between them. The officer standing closer tried to grab her, but she pushed away from him and, nearly tripping, ran on. The officer started to chase her, but seeing that she had already run a few steps, he turned to the crowd, fearing that someone else would try to slip through the cordon, and spread his arms. He stood up, spreading his arms, warning the crowd not to try to rush to the bank, looking back at the running woman. There was a lonely jeep standing in front of the bank. Ilya and Alex, standing behind their BMW in the center of the street, looked at the bank's window. Half hidden by the car, they listened to Max's explanation. Max pointed to the bank doors and said, "Max. It will take 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes to clear the mines." Suddenly he interrupted his explanation, lowering his hand. They saw Eva running towards the bank, breaking through the police cordon. Ilya, staring at her with wide eyes out of inertia, pulled his pistol from its holster and, placing his hand on the roof of the car, began to aim at the running woman. Alex, glancing at his boss, understood what would happen in the next second. Without a second thought, Alex pushed his boss's hand away and ran as fast as he could. They rushed to the bank, Eva in high heels and the guy. Max raised his hand, stopping his men just in case. Eva hadn't even made it 2 meters when something heavy crashed down on her, knocking her off her feet. Alex, who had fallen next to her, jumped to his feet and, grabbing her by the waist, dragged her back. Eva began to fight back, trying to run to the bank doors, shouting, "Eve! My husband is there! My daughter!" Alex did not listen to her screams and, turning away from the blows, lifted her off the ground and delivered her to the police cordon. Several police officers jumped out from the fence. Alex handed her over to them and walked back, dusting himself off and looking back. Alex approached Ilya and Max and stood, facing the bank. Ilya stood with his pistol lowered. He glanced at Alex and said, putting the gun back in its holster, "Ilya. Well done." Alex nodded, turning halfway towards Ilya, and began to look at the bank window. In the elevator. Evening. The elevator doors open. People in masks stand, waiting for the doors to open. The bank employee stands with his head hunched. The doors opened. A guy flew out of the elevator and hit the wall. The guys in masks followed him out and walked down the corridor. One of them came up and, taking a bunch of keys from his belt, began to open the steel-barred door. The rest waited. Opening, he swung it open and let his accomplices inside. One remained near the elevator next to the bank employee. He squatted down after the gun was pointed at him. The guy who opened the door looked back and followed the guys who entered. Nat. Limousine. Evening. Ilya and Alex are standing in front of a BMW. A jeep is parked in front of the bank. A black limousine pulls up from the other end of the street. He stops in front of a cordon of police cars. Ilya and Alex turn their heads in that direction. A bodyguard jumped out of the car. The big guy sitting next to the driver opened the limousine door. A 50-year-old man in a business suit came out. A young man in a blue suit followed, carrying a briefcase and wearing clear glasses. They approached the police cordon and stopped. Alex turned and walked towards the arriving men to find out what was going on. He walked up and stopped in front of them. Alex. Assistant Criminal Investigator Alex. Bank owner. I am a bank owner. I would like to inform you about the capital held in the bank, and if you need our assistance in any matter, we are ready. Alex. Wait a second. Alex interrupted him, raising his finger up and turning around, walking back. Alex walked back and stood next to Ilya. Ilya stood looking at the bank window. Alex. The bank owner wants to help. Ilya glanced at Alex. He glanced at the people standing at the police cordon and, turning to the bank, said, Ilya. Let it not interfere. Alex walked towards the guests. He came up to them and said, Alex. Thank you. Preparations are currently underway for the operation, and the seizure will begin at any moment. Therefore, your assistance is not needed. I apologize. And he was already about to turn around and go back. Banker. Yes, but we wanted to inform you about the amount that is in the bank. Alex. We are not interested in this at the moment. Banker. How could I care less? There's about 120 million in the safe and 80 million in securities. Alex. Preparations are underway right now, and no matter how much money is in the bank, it won't change anything. We'll catch them, and then everything will become clear, how much they took and what damage they caused to the bank. Okay. Banker. Okay. The banker replied, thinking for a moment and then nodding his head slightly. The bank owner turned his gaze to Ilya standing near the BMW. He narrowed his eyes and, turning around, walked towards the limousine. The guy in the blue suit quickly followed, nodding his head at Alex. Alex turned around and walked towards Ilya. The arrivals got into the limousine and began to drive away. Ilya glanced at the departing limousine as Alex approached him. They stood next to each other, looking at the bank window. Int. Bank Hall. Evening. In the hallway, everyone is lying on the floor. A broken hanging. Shot through windows. Glass fragments and debris. A masked man stands at the counter behind the pillar, his finger on the trigger. A large caliber machine gun lies on the counter. He peers out from the pole and looks out onto the street through the huge bank window. On the street, flashing sirens, strange sounds, people in military uniform. He looks for a second, and then hides behind the post again. Weapon. Machine gun with a machine gun belt. Nat. In front of the bank. Ilya walks back and forth near the BMW, lost in thought. Alex stands leaning against the car. Ilya's gaze falls on the cafe located opposite the bank. The empty cafe was deserted. Only one man, dressed in a black suit and shirt, sat eating dinner. As if nothing had happened. There was only one bartender behind the counter, waiting for the customer to finish his dinner and, having paid, leave the cafe. Ilya walked back and stopped next to Alex, glancing at him. He raised his head, looking at Ilya, who had stopped and was looking at him. Ilya turned his gaze toward the cafe. Alex followed his chef's gaze and saw a man eating dinner. Then, silently, he walked toward the cafe. Ilya began to look at the bank window. Alex entered the cafe. He walked up to the man sitting in the cafe. Alex. I'm sorry. Alex approached and introduced himself. Alex. Assistant Criminal Investigator Alex. It is not safe to be here. A bank takeover could begin at any time. Therefore, I would ask you to leave the cafe immediately, it's in your best interests. Shooting will start and it is not safe for your life. Okay. Banker. Fine. The man put down the fork and knife he had been holding in his hand until then and, taking a napkin, wiped his lips. Ilya glanced at the cafe. Alex was standing near the table, talking. He was already wiping his lips with a napkin. In a cafe. Alex turned and walked towards the exit, nodding to the waiter as he went. The man at the table took out his wallet, counted out some money, and placed it on the table. He rose from his seat and headed for the exit. Leaving the cafe, he walked down the sidewalk, not looking around. In the opposite direction. Alex walked up to the boss and stood next to him. Ilya glanced after the departing man and turned his gaze to the bank. Natural. Chairman. Evening. Walking along the sidewalk, the man turned into an alley. He walked over to the Mercedes and sat down in the front seat next to the driver. The guy immediately turned the ignition on, started the car, and sped off. He drove down the road. After rounding the building, the Mercedes approached the bank on the other side. Pedestrians were walking as usual. Cars sped down the road. A cordon was visible at the other end of the street in front of a bank. The minibus pulled up to the side of the road, right under a manhole cover. The man from the cafe opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Having stepped out onto the sidewalk, he opened the car door and entered the car. Locked the door from the inside. Sitting down on the bench, he leaned towards the floor and, taking hold of the handles, pushed open the square door in the floor. A square, gaping hole appeared in the floor of the minibus. The iron circle of a manhole cover was visible in the hole. He sat down on the bench. Straightening up and leaning back on the bench, he began to wait. Int. PADVAL. Evening. 3 armed men in masks run into the storage facility. One of them, approaching the safe door, massive, steel, as tall as a man, put down his bag and began to take out boxes of wires. He stood up and secured the 8 boxes to the edges of the safe. He took out a radio-controlled device and extended the antenna. He stepped aside and turned to his accomplices. The other one walked slowly to the door, taking off his gloves. Threw it on the floor. He leaned against the safe and put his ear to the cold steel surface of the door. He stepped back. He took 2 steel rods from his bosom and inserted them into the safe lock. The guy standing to the side raised his left hand and checked the time on his watch. He was doing some manipulations with the safe lock. Dead silence. Clock. Second hand. 37 seconds. Bear. Hop. The guy who was fiddling with the door shouted and, taking hold of the safe handles, opened the door wide. With a little effort. Thick steel door. The one who was keeping track of the time lowered his hand, forgetting about the time. They stood silently frozen in place even after the door was opened. Then it dawned on them that the door was open and they rushed inside. Having burst in, they pulled out bags and, straightening them out, began stuffing the money into them, neatly stacked and sealed with duct tape. They did this silently, without making any unnecessary movements. The safecracker walked into a room with money neatly stacked on the shelves. He looked around and stopped his gaze on a small safe standing on a shelf in the middle. By this time they had filled their bags and, having pulled the zippers, were throwing them out into the corridor. A guy standing in the hallway saw 2 large, filled black bags fly out. Hostage. They looked into each other's eyes. A safecracker stands in front of a small safe. He opens the door. In the middle is a small box. The gloved safecracker opened the box, and his eyes widened in amazement. There was a diamond the size of a pigeon's egg in the box. He, without saying anything, took the stone with 2 fingers and put it in his pocket. Natural discussion evening. Ilya, Alex and Max stand leaning over the hood of the BMW. They look at a map that shows all the buildings and the main roads adjacent to them. Gas, water, and sewer lines. Ilya looks and asks. Ilya. Why are they hesitating? Asking myself rather. Alex and Max look at him silently. Waiting. Ilya. How much time has passed? Alex quickly glanced at his watch. Alex. 2 minutes. He fell silent again, bending over the map. They followed his example. Ilya. Something's not right here. Ilya took his hands off the hood and began to look at the bank window. 2 men in camouflage stood pressed against the wall on either side of the bank, taking a vantage point. Ilya turned his head slightly toward Max and asked. Ilya. How much time did you say it would take to defuse such a bomb? Max. 2 to 3 minutes if everything goes well, Max replied. Ilya continued. Ilya. And about 5 minutes to storm. And if they start to break through, they'll take hostages. They didn't have time to jump out before we arrived, which means they'll break through. He looked around. Ilya. So the building is cordoned off? He asked, looking at Alex. Ilya. All entrances and exits of the building have been cordoned off. Roofs and windows have been secured. Police patrols have been posted around the building. If assistance is needed, backup forces are always on hand. Everyone has been warned. Here everything depends on the capture group. Alex. This is Max's business. Alex said, looking at Max. Ilya turned to Max. Max. I think everything will be fine. My guys know their stuff. Max straightened up and answered confidently. Ilya listened to Max, thinking intensely about something of his own. Ilya. One thing is strange, something is too quiet with them. Okay. If there is no news from them in 5 minutes, we will begin the capture operation. Ilya turned to face the bank. Alex and Max followed his example. Int. Care. Evening. The elevator doors opened. 4 people exited the elevator, 2 with 2 large bags on their shoulders. 3 went down the corridor, 1 remained at the elevator with a gun. He turned in the opposite direction and whistled loudly twice. In the central hall. The guy standing behind the machine gun counter turned his head toward the door, hearing whistles. One was muffled. He leaned away from the counter and, pulling the pistol from his bosom, ran to the door. He appeared in the corridor and saw his masked figure falling. He waved his hand, indicating the direction. The 3 were already walking down the corridor in the indicated direction. The guy from the hall quickly ran past his waiting friend, who followed suit. They all disappeared down the hallway, disappearing behind the door. Toilet. 3 people entered the restroom. 2 were carrying bags. They put them aside. The third, holding a pistol in his hand, was mentally calculating something, examining one of the walls. He began tapping the back of the pistol on the wall's tiles. Finding a hollow space, he struck the tile, which cracked. At this time, the last 2 entered and stood at the entrance. A man with a gun pointed to the broken slab. One of the people who entered took a round box with a suction cup out of his bosom and attached it to the wall. They moved away and stood on the sides. Having finished his preparations, he gestured with his hand for them to step aside. Seeing that everyone was ready, he turned something on the box, where a bright red light began to blink. Having finished, he abruptly jumped aside and stood behind one of the partitions. A dull explosion was heard. A section of the wall, a meter in circumference, broke off and shattered into thousands of pieces, striking the opposite wall with the blast wave. A hole was created. One of those standing was the first to rush into the hole, coughing and waving away the hanging dust. Another guy threw a bag into the hole. Another one followed after the bag. They threw another bag. Another guy followed him. The last person to jump into the hole was the man with the pistol, looking back. Hole. Nat. Capture. Evening. It's dark. There is a jeep in front of the bank. Alex leaned on the wing and looked towards the bank. Ilya and Max stand next to each other, waiting. Suddenly there was a dull, barely audible explosion. Ilya raised his head, looking tensely to the side, the bank. Ilya. Did you hear? He asked, looking at Max. Max. Yes. He answered, listening to something. Ilya. Let's get started. Ilya ordered. He nodded and raised his hand to the guy standing near the armored jeep parked at the end of the paramilitary street. The car took off and raced towards the bank entrance. They drove up at high speed, stopping right in front of a lonely jeep. 2 guys in uniform with helmets on their heads jumped out of the car and ran to the bank doors. One stood in front of the door, the other one next to him opened the case with foam rubber inside. The sapper set to work. He began to carefully unscrew. Ilya, Max and Alex froze with bated breath. The sapper took a breath and carefully pulled out the glass capsule, holding it in the air and slowly placing it in the case. He closed the case and ran to the car. The sapper tore the suction cup bomb from the door and, turning to Max, gave a thumbs-up signal that everything was fine. He stepped aside. 10 or 12 guys in camouflage uniforms and helmets instantly appeared. The first two opened the doors, allowing the others to slip into the bank. They closed the doors behind the escaped boys and remained standing outside. Men in military uniforms appeared at the bank's door. They scurried in, letting each other pass in pairs, taking up positions for combat. They walked down the hall, garbage, glass, plaster. So they entered the cash register booth. People looked at the men in uniform, with short machine guns in their hands, moving silently. The creak of glass or splinters. One cashier pointed his finger at the open barred door. They ran inside. One of them opened the door wide. The other guy slipped inside and pressed himself against the opposite wall. The third pair followed. Another pair followed in the same manner as the first. They ran into the corridor and began to run in short dashes. One couple stopped in front of the elevator, the other proceeded toward the restroom. The elevator was called. They emerged at the bottom and walked toward the safe with its doors open. Two men were sitting on the floor. They jumped to their feet and pointed guns at them. They raised their hands and spoke, interrupting each other. Hostages in a bank. They went upstairs. One of the soldiers spoke into a microphone built into his helmet. Special forces. The basement is clean. They're upstairs. People stand opposite each other. Toilet. The two stopped in the toilet, waving their weapons around. We stopped and saw a hole in the wall. One covered, the other went to the wall. Commander of the second group. I'm the seventh. All clear. No one. A hole in the wall. They remained standing. Outside the bank. Evening. Outside. Max, holding the headphones to his ear, was talking. Max. Yes. Understood. Wait where you are. Max rushed to the bank, shouting to Ilya as he went. Max. They left. Ilya, as if struck by lightning, rushed after him. Alex broke loose and ran after them. Max, followed by Ilya and Alex, ran into the hall. Men in military uniforms still stood at the sides, against the walls, awaiting orders. The others were lifting bank employees and customers one by one and leading them out. The soldier pointed to the teller's door. Max rushed there, followed by Ilya and Alex. They ran out into the corridor. Max was pointed to the end of the corridor. They ran there. They appeared in the toilet. Max, Ilya and Alex. They walked to the hole and stopped. Max and Alex stepped aside. Ilya froze. He stepped back and began to point his finger somewhere behind the wall. Ilya. Alex is with me. Max, wait for my signal. He spoke and ran towards the exit. Alex rushed after him, not understanding anything. Max remained standing surrounded by his guys. In front of the hole in the wall. Int. Sewer. Evening. A crack appeared in the wall. Someone is kicking a hole. Feet. A man in a black mask jumps out of the hole and stands up. Sewage water flows along the bottom. A large bag appears in the hole. He takes it and, throwing it over his shoulder, walks along the tunnel. Another one appears behind the bag and stands up. The bag is handed over next. He throws it over his shoulder and follows his friend. So, 5 people emerge one after another and head in the same direction. The last one to jump out is a guy with a gun and goes to catch up with his guys. They walk 30 to 40 meters along the tunnel and come out to a staircase leading upward. One after another, in the darkness, they begin to climb up the stairs, passing bags to each other. At the top, in the back of a Mercedes, a man leaning against the back of a bench rises, drawn by the sound of a manhole cover opening. The hatch is pulled open by someone's hands. Then a bag appears in the hatch. The man in the Mercedes grabs the bag and lifts it into the minivan. He then lifts 4 large bags and places them in the back. 5 men in black masks climb up to pick up the bags. A shot from the street. There is a narrow strip under the car. People come out of the hatch and climb into the MiC-AVT through the bottom. Inside the body. A man in the back of the truck helps his friends get into the back. A police car driving along the street passes by. The driver watched the police car in his rearview mirror. It passed. He calmed down. Body. The last guy to climb in bent down and put the hatch back in place. Then he closed the bottom of the Mercedes and sat down, leaning his elbows against the back of the bench. The man from the cafe banged on the side of the car several times, signaling for it to move. The driver, hearing the appointed signal, started the car and pulled away. The Mercedes rolled down the road without attracting anyone's attention. Nat. Police. Evening. Ilya rushed out of the bank, waving his arms. He held a walkie-talkie in his left hand. Alex jumped out after him. Ilya turned to face the bank as if seeing it for the first time, then broke into a run along the edge of the sidewalk. Alex ran after him, looking worriedly at his boss. Ilya waved his arms, calculating something, stopped, and ran on. He rounded the intersection and ran around the corner. They ran along a different sidewalk. Alex ran behind him. They stopped. Ilya pressed the radio button and put it to his ear. Ilya. Max, where are you? Toilet. Inside the bank. Max. Here on the spot. Street. Ilya is talking on the radio. Ilya. Come on, let's go. Toilet. Max. Okay, I'm going. Max pulled out a flashlight, turned it on, and jumped into the hole. A pistol in his other hand. 2 of his group flipped the switches on their flashlights and jumped in after him. Sewage. Max jumped out below and landed with his feet on the ground. Holding a flashlight, he shone it in different directions. 2 more men followed, carrying flashlights and weapons. They squatted down and examined the ground. One, seeing clumps of dirt, raised his hand and shouted. Max's partner. Here. They watered their occupation and followed in that direction. Max and his guys ran along the tunnel. After running about 30 meters, they came across a staircase leading upward. Max climbed up, giving the order. Max. Wait here. Street. Ilya stands directly above the manhole cover. Alex stands next to him. There are fresh stains of dirt near the hatch. A strip of light shines through the hatch. Ilya. Max, is that you? Max. Yes. Ilya. Come on, we're at the top. Then the hatch lid slides open. A flashlight beam appears. Max's head appears. He climbs out and stands next to me, shaking himself. Ilya, Alex, and Max stand looking at each other. Ilya turned to Max. Ilya. How? Stumbled. Ilya. How many are there? 5-3, upstairs. 2, on standby. So how can 5 people emerge from a hatch and leave unnoticed? They were in work uniform and disguised as. Alex stopped under Ilya's gaze. Ilya fixed his gaze on the hole in the asphalt. Max followed his example as if all the answers to their questions were there. Alex turned to Ilya. Alex. Here comes the patrolman. A patrol car pulled up to them and a police officer got out. Ilya waved his hand at him, beckoning him to come over. He came up and asked about. Patrol. What's happened? Ilya. You patrol this street? Ilya asked him. Patrol. Yes. I didn't notice anything strange here. Patrol. No, I answered no. He thought about it. Patrol. Ah, what exactly is strange? Ilya. Well, about 5 people came out of the sewer hatch, in overalls or something like that. Patrol. No, I wouldn't have noticed. I've been patrolling here for about an hour now. Ilya frowned. Ilya. What happened 5 minutes ago? Patrol. Nothing special. There was a Mercedes parked here. Ilya. Which Mercedes? Ilya interrupted him animatedly. Patrol. Mercedes minibus. Ilya closed his eyes. Ilya. All clear. Do you remember the number? Patrol. No. He answered, spreading his arms. Ilya. Do you recognize the driver's face? Patrol. I didn't know I had to. There are a lot of cars here. I didn't think. The patrolman began to justify himself. Ilya. In a minibus the engine is in the front. Max. Yes. Said Max, shrugging his shoulders. Ilya. It's all clear. They poured straight from the manhole cover into the car, so no one noticed them. Max and Alex exchanged glances. Ilya. Okay. Max, close the hatch and post a guard at the bank. You, he turned to the policeman, stay here until they make a hole. Alex and I will go into the store. He spoke while looking at the window of the building across the street. There was a guy sitting in a chair at the counter in the video rental store. Ilya headed toward the store. Alex followed. Max began closing the hatch. The patrolman began helping, trying to make up for his mistake. Int. Shop. Evening. Ilya and Alex entered the store and headed straight for the counter where the guy was sitting. The guy raised his head, looking up from the computer. They came up and stood at the counter. Ilya. Hello. I'm from the Criminal Investigation Department. Investigator Ilya __. Alex took out the red book and opened it to show it. He looked at the book and began to look at Ilya, clicking a key on the computer. Salesman. Am I listening? Ilya. There, on the street, right above the manhole cover, a Mercedes minibus was parked for about 10 minutes. We didn't remember the driver's face or the license plate number. The guy looked out onto the street through the store window at the place where the police patrolman stood, then turned to Ilya and looked into his eyes. Salesman. I know nothing. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. They looked into each other's eyes. Silence. Ilya turned around and walked towards the exit. Alex followed him, after hesitating. They went outside and walked along the sidewalk near the shop window. The guy followed them, following them with his eyes. Street. Ilya and Alex walked side by side on the sidewalk. Alex looked at the boss, who was walking silently next to him, and asked a question. Alex. Are we going to take him? He looked at Alex, shook his head, and answered, continuing to walk. Ilya. No. They moved on. Nat. Patrol. Evening. A police car is driving by, with a stocky, fair-haired man of about 30 at the wheel. Next to him is a dark-haired man of about 25. They listen to the message on the radio. Voice from the radio. All patrols. Detain any suspicious vehicle in a black Mercedes. The vehicle may contain 5 armed men who committed a bank robbery an hour ago. The truck bed may have a hatch done in the bottom. If the perpetrators are discovered, report them immediately to the police. Over and out. The policemen in the car exchanged glances. The driver stopped near the cafe, turned off the engine and said, Sergeant. It's written all over the car's forehead that it's suspicious. And getting out of the car, he went to the cafe. The guy smiled back and watched as his partner entered the cafe. Shrugging his swollen shoulders, he opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. He turned to face the car and squared his shoulders. He glanced around, adjusting his seat belt out of habit. A black Mercedes-Benz pulled up to the traffic light at the intersection and stopped at a red light. The patrolman glanced at the driver and fixed his gaze on him. The driver glanced through the windshield at the patrol police officer. The policeman glanced back at the cafe. Thoughtfully, seeing his partner buying sandwiches at the counter, he turned and walked toward the minibus. He walked along the sidewalk and stopped near the door. He rapped his knuckles on the glass. The driver pressed a button on the control panel, and the window slid down. The guy bent down and, placing his fingers on his head, introduced himself. He showed his badge. Patrol. Police patrol. I can look at your documents. He looked at the guy, then silently took his license out of his visor and handed it to the policeman. The policeman straightened up, took the license in his hands and examined it, then handed it back to the driver. Patrol. Will you open the body? The driver squinted, looking tensely at the policeman. Driver. Are there any problems? The police patrolman smiled as politely as possible. Patrol. No problem. Just a routine check. The cars parked nearby started moving when the traffic light turned green. The driver reached under the newspaper lying on the front seat. The policeman stood leaning towards the window. The driver took out a pistol from under a newspaper, raising it upwards with a silencer. The newspaper slid off the driver's hand and the gun was aimed at the policeman. His eyes widened as he saw the barrel of a gun appear. He tried to push off the minibus door with his hands. Chest. A shot rang out, a light pop. The bullet hit the chest, staining the police uniform. On the side. The policeman fell back and, struck by a bullet, fell to the sidewalk. The car suddenly started moving and drove along the road. In the cafe. The police officer's partner handed over the money for the sandwiches and glasses of cola and glanced down the street out of habit. Suddenly, he led his partner past the microwave, which had flown backward and landed on the sidewalk. The clerk took the money from him. The microwave took off. The police officer, throwing the sandwiches on the counter, rushed for the exit. He nearly collided with the customers entering the cafe. He rushed out into the street and saw his partner lying on the ground. A man and woman, a couple of passers-by, were already standing near him, eager to find out what had happened. The man was taking out his cell phone. The policeman looked the other way and saw a black minivan turning the intersection. He rushed to his car, shouting to the passers-by standing on the sidewalk near his partner. Sergeant. Call an ambulance. He ran to his car and grabbed the door, opened it slightly, and froze in place, looking ahead. Then he slammed the door hard, suddenly thinking, walked around his car, pulled his pistol from its holster, stood with his legs apart, and took aim at an oncoming car. It was a paramilitary jeep with an open top and no tarp. A young man was driving. About 26 years old. The young man saw a policeman standing in front of him, aiming a pistol at him. The driver slammed on the brakes, startled, more by surprise, and stared at the policeman. The policeman, still aiming, walked around the car, opened the door, and said, "Sergeant. Police patrol. Get out of the car." The guy raised his hands as a sign that he was not trying to resist and jumped out of the car. The policeman jumped into the driver's seat and, pressing on the gas, took off, speeding down the road. The guy was still standing there, not having come to his senses. Suddenly he looked around. Standing on tiptoe and raising his right hand with the index finger pointed at the departing policeman, he shouted. Jeep driver. Goat. Stands on the road. Natural surveillance. Evening. The minibus stops at a red traffic light. A jeep pulls up behind them and stops next to them. A guy wearing just a t-shirt and dark glasses, with a VDV tattoo on his shoulder, is sitting behind the wheel. Thrilling rap music is playing from the car. The guy nods his head to the beat of the music, looking around. The driver of the microcar looks at him indifferently. The traffic light turns green. The microcar starts moving. The guy in the jeep takes a pen and writes the license plate of the departing minivan on a notepad lying on the front seat of the car. There's a police uniform lying under the seat in front. He's also wearing police pants blue. He follows and turns aside at the next intersection. The microcar continues straight ahead. The guy in the jeep hits the gas and turns into an alley. He makes maneuvers that only he understands. The policeman, having reached the end, stops and, turning off the engine, slides under the seat. A moment later, a microcar passes through the intersection. After the sound of the engine of the microcar passed, the boy appears in his place. Suburb. The micro car drove along the road and turned towards the house. The gate floated up and the car drove into the garage. A jeep appears behind the trees and stops, hidden by the greenery of the trees and bushes. The guy gets out of the car and, standing by the road, looks at the house, turns on the radio. He brings it to his face. Natural suburb. Evening. Suburb. The BMW pulled up to the designated location. A car was driving. A guy came out to meet them, stepping away from the jeep and discreetly raising his hands in front of him, signaling for the BMW to stop. Oh. Ilya and Alex got out of the car and walked towards him. The boy pointed his finger at them, waiting silently. Alex pulled out his badge and introduced himself, pointing to the man standing next to him. Alex. This is the chief of the police department, Ilya, and his assistant, Alex. He nodded his head and introduced himself. Sergeant. Sergeant. Highway Patrol. He turned and, approaching the jeep, pointed with his hand towards the house through the thick greenery of the leaves. Ilya and Alex walked up to him and looked in the direction indicated, looking questioningly into his eyes. Sergeant. The minibus drove into the gate of this house. Ilya. Great. How many people are there? Sergeant. I don't know, I only saw the driver. Ilya. And the rest? Sergeant. I didn't see anyone. Ilya. Where did you get the idea that this is the minibus we are interested in? Sergeant. He shot my partner. Ilya looked questioningly at the policeman, looking him over from head to toe. The patrolman followed Ilya's gaze and, realizing what was going on, began to explain. Sergeant. I can explain why I'm like this, he explained, waving his hand at his t-shirt. Ilya. Stop, let's start over. Ilya cut him off, getting ready to listen to his story. He put his hands forward, a gesture of calming them with his palms. Sergeant. My partner and I pulled up to a street cafe half an hour ago and decided to grab a bite to eat when we heard a radio call about a missing person searching for a black Mercedes minivan with people inside who had robbed a bank. I went inside to buy sandwiches and a few other things. It's my turn today while my partner stayed outside. Then, out of habit, I look out the shop window, at my partner. He is standing next to a black Mercedes microcar and suddenly falls onto the asphalt. I run out into the street. He is lying with a bleeding wound in his chest in the middle of the sidewalk. They exchanged glances. The sergeant continued. Sergeant. I asked passers-by to call an ambulance, and he glanced at the jeep parked nearby. I followed the minibus. As I got closer, I wrote down the license plate number. He took a notebook out of his pocket and read it. Then I realized that they were heading to the suburbs towards the road and, taking a shortcut so that they wouldn't smell my tail, I got here. If I had followed them, they would have noticed the surveillance anyway. And since I know every road in the city like the back of my hand, it wasn't particularly difficult for me to follow their trail unnoticed, he explained, pointing at the house. They drove into this garage, and I stayed here, reporting to the administration, and began to keep watch so that they did not leave unnoticed. Ilya looked at Alex. He stepped aside and called the duty officer on the radio. Taking the radio off his belt, he began to wait, looking at the house. Alex. Duty officer. I'm assistant investigator, corner. Police Alex. Give me information about the police patrolman. Yes. Gunshot wound, near the cafe on the street. Pause. He tilts his head and listens. Alex. Fine. Alex turned towards the house, looking at their backs. He perked up, holding the receiver to his ear. Alex. Yes, yes, I'm listening. In intensive care. Okay. Over and out. Alex walked back. Ilya looked at Alex. Alex closed his eyes, signaling that the information was confirmed. Ilya turned to the patrolman, glancing at the house. Ilya. Were you the only one tracking down the micro? Decided to play hero. looking into the eyes. He frowned, puzzled. Ilya continued. Ilya. Why didn't you report it to management right away? Sergeant. No. I thought the patrolmen would start shooting after the report, trying to detain me themselves. Innocent people could have been hurt. Passers-by there. He fell silent. Ilya. In principle, it is logical. He raised his hand, looking at his watch. And turning to Alex. Ilya. Let's wait for Max. Then he turned to the patrolman. Ilya. You didn't try to find a job in the criminal police. He answered in bewilderment, shaking his head. Ilya. No. If I invite you to my place, will it be okay? He shrugged. Sergeant. I will think. Fine. They began to look at the house. Natural roof. Night. The guy with the ultrasound is sitting on the roof. He smokes, looking at the road. Suddenly, a BMW with its roof siren off appears on the road. The car stops behind the trees. The guy gets up, carefully throwing the cigarette butt on the ground, and looks with wide eyes. Suddenly he breaks away and runs down the stairs. Corridor. Opens the door and bursts into the room. The people in the room grab their weapons at the unexpected intrusion. John. Cops. Leader. Don't shout. The elder shouted at him. Leader. Come on, everyone to the basement. He waved his hand. All 8 people grabbed their things, bags, etc., and ran out of the room. We ran down the corridor and came to the basement door. The boss waited until everyone entered the basement doors, fashioned a box out of a bag and placed it on the table in the middle of the room. Flicked the switch. Face. The clock started ticking and the red light came on. Blinking. He walked to the basement door and disappeared behind it. The doors closed. Nat. Waiting. Night. A Ford appears from the road. A bus follows. Black with a red stripe down the middle and tinted windows. Ilya and Alex turned in that direction. Ford and the bus stopped. Max got out of the car and headed towards Ilya and Alex. They shook hands. Ilya. They are in the house. Ilya nodded towards the house. He looked at the house and asked. Max. How many are there? Ilya. No information. Max. Okay, I'm ready. Ilya. Then go ahead. And he took out his weapon. Max turned to the bus and waved his hand. People in black and green camouflage began to run out of the bus. They lined up in 2 rows. Max pointed to the house and gave instructions. Max. There are about 6 armed men in the house. Maybe more, but no less. 3 groups, snipers as cover, you go to the roof, you go in front, you go around. Got it. They nodded their heads. Max. Go ahead guys. A group of 30 people, breaking up as they went, headed toward the house. One group headed toward the front door, another to the left, and a third to the right. Ilya and Alex, standing behind the BMW, watched the capture. The central group was at the door and window, in front of the house. 7 to 8 people. One group on the right, one on the left. Snipers were spread out around the house. Several guys threw the grappling hooks and climbed up the rope onto the roof. One of the central group attached explosives to the door and, after counting to 3, blew it up. The others, breaking the glass with bursts of machine gun fire, climbed through the windows. A group of soldiers ran through the door. Moving in pairs, they ran down the empty corridor, not meeting any resistance. The group, finding themselves in the hall, they dispersed. One ran up to the table and, finding himself in the center, saw a box on the table, working clock hands and a blinking light. The guy raised his hand up and shouted. Special Forces. Stop. Freeze. In the deathly silence, the measured ticking of the clock hands was heard. The guy started shouting into his helmet microphone. Special Forces. The house is mine. Everyone back. Everyone instantly turned around and ran towards the exit. From the rooftops, using ropes. They jumped out of windows, headfirst. Through doors. They ran away from the house in different directions. Inside the room. The clock hands clicked. There was an explosion. Outside. A sheaf of flame and torn debris flew into the air. The last soldiers were thrown back by the blast wave and fell to the ground. Ilya and Alex ducked near the car as a piece of flaming wood flew over their heads. Int. Underground. Night. They crawl inside a tunnel. Beams of light. Flashlights in hand, bags on their backs. One after another. After about 50 meters, they emerge, opening a hatch. They find themselves in the basement of a neighboring building. They exit onto the first floor. They run to the garage, which faces the street on the other side. The leading man stops and looks at the burning building next door, surrounded by police and men in military uniforms. He looks out the window. In the garage, everyone gets into the car, ready to go. It's a Jeep with tinted windows. The lift gate opens, and they drive out onto the street. The garage doors slide upward. Natural. In front of the house. Night. Suburb. In front of the house. Ilya sits in the car with the door open. Alex stands next to him, puzzled. Firefighters scurry about, putting out the fire. Ilya looks up, looking at the smoking house. Ilya. This can't be. Why would they blow themselves up after receiving that kind of money? Alex shrugs. Alex. Something is wrong here. Ilya. That's exactly it. Ilya answered. Suddenly he closed his eyes and hissed through his teeth. Ilya. Damn, a tunnel. They dug a tunnel and left, just like they did at the bank. He spoke hesitantly, but his confidence grew with each passing second. He jumped to his feet, looking around. He walked to the side and then back, taking a few steps. Alex perked up and stood nearby. Ilya extended his hand forward and began giving instructions, almost shouting. Ilya. Alex, take some people and check all the nearby houses to see if they have a secret passage in the basement. And where it leads. If you find one, call me. You understand? Alex jumped up. Alex. Yes. I ran to one of the nearest houses, calling the police to follow me. Alex. Follow me. They ran after Alex. Ilya remained standing, looking around. Natural house. Night. Suburb. Alex runs out onto the area in front of the house, shouting and waving his hand. Ilya turns around and, seeing Alex giving him signs, walks towards him with hurried steps. Alex stands impatiently waiting for the boss. Ilya approaches. Alex. Ilya, it's here. Alex turns animatedly to Ilya and runs into the house. Ilya enters next. Alex walks a little ahead, stopping occasionally. Turning to Ilya, he explains. Alex. There's an underground tunnel here in the basement. The hole leads straight to our house. Apparently, while we were busy capturing them, they went underground. And most importantly, we don't know what kind of vehicles they're using or where to look for them. So, they stopped in front of an open lid with a gaping hole in it. Ilya turned around and went back. He stopped at the window, looking at the smoking house. 50 meters from his back. Int. Home. Night. City. Apartment. Night. Silence. Ilya is sitting at the table. The clock on the table ticks, indicating the time, 1 p.m. He holds a piece of paper in his hands. After looking at it thoughtfully, he throws it on the table and picks up a pen. Leaning over the table, he begins to scribble something. Suddenly, the telephone rings. Ilya, without looking up from his work, picked up the phone and, after a pause, scribbled something on the paper. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, put the pen down, and raised the receiver to his ear. Alex's voice came through the receiver. Alex. I know how to get on their trail. Ilya. Well then. Alex. Since they know the location of the bank well, it means that one of their employees is involved in the robbery. Ilya. And what do you suggest? Alex. Check all bank employees. Ilya. This is a useless endeavor. Alex. Why? Ilya. The bank has been around for 7 years. During that time, about 100 people have worked there. Some leave, others come. We need to vet each one for at least a couple of months. And the same amount of time to check for any contacts with criminals, if any are found. It's a waste of time. Even if we find him, he'll never admit to involvement. That there was a leak from the bank is undeniable, but we can only find him if we bust the gang. But for now, we need to catch at least one of them. Do you understand what I mean? Alex. Yes, I didn't think about that. Ilya. Okay, we'll talk tomorrow. Alex. Good night. Ilya. Come on, sleep. Beeps. Ilya puts the receiver down on the telephone and looks out the window. It's dark outside the window. Natural sight. Morning. Police station. A BMW pulls up to the station. Journalists standing on the street rush to the car. Ilya gets out of the car. He pushes his way through a crowd of journalists shoving a microphone under his nose and vying with each other for questions. Journalist. How is the investigation progressing? 2 Journalist. Do you have any evidence? There are suspected criminals. 3 Journalist. You think the case will be solved? Police officers at the entrance to the building rushed to his aid. He pushed through the crowd and climbed the stairs. He entered the doors. The doors closed behind him. Ilya walked down the corridor. Several police officers greet each other. One gets up from his chair and with several sheets of Watman paper in his hands goes to Ilya. Duty. Ready. Ilya. Let's. Ilya takes the sheets of paper and, with several people who have come up, including Alex, enters the door of the police station. The inscription on the door. They say hello. The boss is writing while sitting at his desk. Seeing the guys enter the office, he looks up from his work and, having finished writing, puts his pen aside. He shakes Ilya's hand and nods to the others, inviting them to join him. Boss. Sit down. Everyone sat down except Ilya. Boss. So what do we have? Ilya. Since last night, Tom has collected all the information about the bank. Boss. Let's get down to business. Ilya unfolded the poster and attached several sheets of paper with the drawn plan to the board. He took out a pen and put the notebook from his inside pocket on the table. Bank drawings. He pointed to the drawing on the right and began to explain. Ilya. Armed and masked men stormed the Rossiya bank. We received the alert at 7:31 and arrived on scene 6 minutes later. By this time, they had shot one of the guards and entered the vault. One remained in the lobby, the other stood in the corridor. 3 of them descended the elevator into the vault. After the alarm sounds, the safe doors automatically lock. The elevator is not locked for operational reasons. This is to prevent loss of life during natural disasters such as fires, earthquakes, and so on. Furthermore, there is a staircase leading to the vault, blocked by a steel door. It is used only in emergencies and for transporting bulky and heavy safes. Since the elevator was working, they went down without any difficulty. They chose option 2. They prepared explosives to blow up the safe if the burglar did not open the safe. They took money in the amount of $12,000 to $120,000, 7 to 370 euros, 2 million rubles. Ilya stopped. After a moment of silence, he continued. Ilya. So while we were preparing for the assault and trying to defuse the mine on the bank doors, they walked with stuffed bags to the end of the corridor and went down into the sewer through a hole in the toilet. The boss's face. Ilya. Over the course of several weeks, they dug a tunnel from the sewer into the bank. They went through the sewer to the other end of the building and emerged from a manhole onto the adjacent street. You already know that a Mercedes minivan was waiting for them, parked for about 5 minutes directly above the manhole. They simply cut a hole in the Mercedes, floorboards and entered the car directly from the sewer, unnoticed from the street. One of the police officers. Not a bad idea. Everyone turned their heads towards the speaker, and then turned to Ilya, who continued speaking. Ilya. And that's not all. A patrol officer approached them, followed them, and the SWAT team sprang into action immediately upon arrival. The house turned out to be mined. After the explosion, we dug a hole in the basement. It turned out they had gone underground to the neighboring house. While we refused, they left unhindered in an unknown direction. Ilya fell silent, deep in thought. Ilya. What's next? Yes. Ilya continued. Ilya. First, they could have entered the bank through the sewers, but they didn't do so to keep the hole hidden from the police for as long as possible. They were guaranteeing their escape. Second, if they hadn't managed to escape quietly, they would have fought their way out. They would have defended themselves, reached the house, and hoped to dig through the neighboring building while the raid was underway. However, patrolling police officers wasn't part of their plan. It was well planned. No expense was spared. Clearly, it was professionally organized. Ilya fell silent. Silence. Boss. So what are you going to do? The boss asked. Ilya turned his gaze to his men and began to testify. They stood up. Ilya. Tom will handle the weapons and explosives. Alex will handle the database of the robbery organizers, and most importantly, look for style and similarities. Got it? Rex. Yes. He answered. Ilya. I'll draw up a plan for the investigation in the near future. That's all. He turned to the boss. Boss. Okay, work, and if anything happens to me. Ilya nodded his head. Ilya. Let's. The boss waved his hand. They left the office. Int. Song. Day. A country house. Second floor. 3 people are playing cards. A guy and a girl are on the sofa. The girl is sitting. The guy is lying down, resting his head on the girl's lap. The guy, sitting in a chair, is playing the guitar. A criminal song is playing. The TV is on low. Int. Vow. Day. Dining room. The police canteen, a regular cafeteria favored by the police. Ilya and Alex are at the table. They're sitting opposite each other. Having lunch. Alex looks up and stares. Alex. We should have put pressure on that guy. Ilya. On which one? Alex. That one is in the rental video. They eat. Ilya. How? Alex. They would have thrown him behind bars with us, beaten him on the head. He would have told everything. Ilya lifted his fork and it hung in the air. He looked into Alex's eyes. He looked at Ilya. Into his eyes. Ilya continued eating. Ilya. Firstly, the guy really could not see anything. Alex chuckled. Ilya. Secondly, any lawyer will get him out in a couple of hours. Ilya continued. Ilya. Thirdly, a person risks their life by testifying against a gang. They could simply be shot before the trial even starts. Our witness protection program is poorly functioning. And most importantly, we, the police, should be protecting people like this guy, not throwing them behind bars and bashing them in the head. Do you understand me? Alex. Got it. But they also have a duty to assist the investigation. The guy was killed. Ilya. Why add to the evil? Crush, maim, throw behind bars. People are already embittered by the police. Do you know who people fear most? Almost screams when he stops eating. Ilya. Neither bandits nor thieves. With a club. You and me. When there's enough cruelty and violence all around. And all you know is to jail and beat someone up. He shouted, standing up straight. The police officers sitting at the nearby tables turned their heads, looking at them. Alex sat with his head bowed. Ilya stood, looking around, coming to his senses. He took money out of his pocket and, throwing it on the table, headed for the exit. Int. Archive. Day. Alex walks down the hallway. He enters the archive room. People in police uniforms are sitting in the hall. A girl sitting in a chair greets him at the entrance. Alex. Hello. Young woman. Hello. She pulled a floppy disk out of the cabinet and put it on the table. Alex took it and, thanking her, went into the hall. Alex. Thank you. He walked over to one of the tables along the wall and sat down at a computer table. He sat down at the table and inserted the disk into the slot. The download began. He glanced at the girl sitting by the entrance. She, sensing someone's gaze, glanced in that direction. She smiled at him. He smiled back. The download finished. Alex began pressing the keys. One by one, faces appeared, and names appeared on the monitor screen. Alex stopped and began reading. Then he started clicking again, faster. Then he got distracted and looked at the girl at the table. She was talking to the guy standing next to her. He turned his gaze to the monitor. He started clicking the key. After a moment, he stopped and froze. He scrolled back through several faces on the monitor screen and settled on one. He peered intently at the face on the monitor. Then he lowered his eyes and returned to looking at the monitor. Suddenly, he stood up abruptly and walked toward the girl at the entrance. He approached. Alex. Can I make a call? And, without waiting for an answer, he picked up the receiver and began dialing. Looking at the girl, he waited. The dial tone stopped. In the archive. Alex. Come in, it's urgent. Ilya. Okay, I'm coming. After a moment's silence, he answered. Ilya hung up the phone and, closing the folder on the table, went to the door. The door closed. Alex walked to the desk and sat down at the monitor. The door opened. The archives room. Ilya entered. Young woman. Hello. The girl said hello. Ilya. Hello. Ilya answered and looked around the room. Alex raised his hand, rising from his chair. Ilya, seeing him, walked toward him. Alex let Ilya, who had just come up, sit down in his place. Ilya glanced at the monitor and then at Alex, who was in a strange state. Ilya. What do you have? Alex looked at the monitor and asked. Alex. Do you see this man? Ilya. Well. Ilya answered in bewilderment, looking at the screen. Alex. Where do you think we saw him during the robbery? Ilya. Don't keep me in suspense. Alex. He remembers there was a cafe across from the bank. A man was dining there alone, and you ordered him escorted out because we were already storming the place. Ilya. And what? Alex. Is this him? Ilya. You are sure? And Ilya stared at the monitor. Alex. 1000%. Ilya narrowed his eyes and looked at Alex doubtfully. Alex explained. Alex. I have a photographic memory. Yes, I talked to him. Ilya. Wait, there he had a mustache and a beard. Alex. He was unshaven. Ilya frowned thoughtfully. Alex added, drawing out the words and jabbing his index finger at Ilya. I'm sure he has a direct connection to this matter. Ilya nodded. Ilya. Not bad. The inspired one beamed. Alex. We just need to find this. Alex leaned slightly to read the name. Alex. No, you won't find him under that name. He probably has fake documents. I'll have to think about that. Alex straightened up. They were silent. Ilya turned his gaze to the wall, where a city map hung, taking up almost the entire wall. Ilya. What if we? He turned to Alex. Ilya. True, this will take a lot of time. He finished, standing up. Ilya stood in front of the map. Alex stood up and stood next to Ilya. Ilya. It's clear they're holed up somewhere. They won't be in the city itself, as 6 people sitting idle could attract attention, and most importantly, someone they know might see them. Our guys are currently combing the entire city. Then, only the outskirts. However, after that capture on the outskirts, they won't go there, and the areas there are densely populated. It's convenient to escape there, but there's no point in hiding. Airports are closed to them, and so are highways. They won't take such a risk after such a successful robbery. Then there's the coastline, and it's easier to escape there, by boat, for example. It's nearly impossible for us to control such a vast expanse of water. What do you think? Looking at Alex. Alex. Exactly. He perked up. Ilya. Then there's only one thing left to do. Print out the photos and distribute them to each district police officer. Brief them on the situation and, under the pretext of searching for the car that caused the accident, comb each officer's area. It'll take them all day. In the meantime, we'll work with the bank employees. Maybe there'll be a lead there too. And if the deal goes down the drain, we'll play it safe and see what happens. We'll get the photo on the news and play by all the rules. You get the idea. Alex. Of course. Shall we begin? Ilya. Certainly. Alex sits down at the computer. Ilya is heading towards the exit. Int. News. Day. House. Second floor. A guy and a girl on the couch. One in a chair. 3 at the card table. The TV is on. The RTR news program is on. Suddenly, the announcer starts talking about the robbery at the Rossiya Bank. Everyone froze and looked at the TV. In front of the police station, a girl in a crowd of journalists tries to ask Ilya a question as he makes his way to the doors. Journalist. Citizen investigator, what's the latest news on the robbery at Bank Rossiya? Ilya manages to make his way to the building's doors. The doors close behind him. The journalist turns to the camera and, against the backdrop of a crowd of journalists, says. Journalist. We were unable to interview investigator Ilya, who is leading this case. Apparently, law enforcement has no news at this time. All we know is that the robbery gang numbers about 5 people. We will follow the investigation, Alexander reported with you. The announcer appeared on the screen. All 6,000 people in the room continued their work, tearing their eyes away from their TV screens. Nat. Policeman. Day. House. On the shore. A police car pulls up to the house. The local police officer comes out with a red folder. He walked to the door. He looked back. He rang the bell. A minute later there is a click and the door opens. A man of about 45 years old appears at the door. District Police Officer. Excuse me, are you the owner of the house? The local police officer asks, opening the folder. Leader. I rent a house. What's the matter? District Police Officer. I'm the District Police Officer. Routine rounds. So, the address. He glanced at the folder and, turning his gaze to the man, asked. District Police Officer. Your last name? Glovery. He replied. The local police officer turned the sheet over and wrote it down, speaking in a friendly manner. District Police Officer. Sometimes our young people here break into empty houses. Thank you. Sorry again, service. The police officer closed the folder and, saluting slightly, walked to his car. He stood in the doorway, glancing sideways and after the other officer. He closed the door. The officer got in and drove off. Nat. Video rental. Day. Video rental shop near the bank. Ilya pulled up to the cafe. Oh, showcase the guy is standing in the same place. Ilya stops at the sidewalk. He gets out and walks to the door. He comes in. The guy looks up and, frozen, watches Ilya approaching him. He comes over and stops at the counter. Ilya. I won't call you to court as a witness. I won't summon you to the station. I won't talk about the children of the murdered bank security guard. I have only one request of you. Ilya took the photo out of his pocket, turned it over, and placed it on the counter. Ilya. I saw this man in a minibus. The boy looked at the photo carefully, unhurriedly. He looked up at Ilya. He beat him to it. Ilya. You can only answer yes or no, that's all. I don't ask for anything more. The guy slowly closed his eyes. Meaningfully. Ilya took the photo. Ilya. Thank you. He turned and walked toward the exit. He walked out and walked to the BMW, getting in. The guy watched the car drive away. Int. Home. Day. A man sits on the sofa, looking at the wall clock. He sits up. The others are playing cards. Leader. Attic. In a chair, a long-haired guy looks up from the card table and, holding cards in his hands, nods his head, looking. Boy. What? Leader. I'll go get some food. Sit quietly, without making any noise. I'll be there in an hour. Good. Boy. Good. A man walks out of a room. Doors. He leaves the house. He looks around and walks to the car. He gets into the Chevrolet and drives away. Natural discussion. Day. Road. Highway. A police officer stands by the side of the road next to a police car. A BMW with a siren on its roof appears and stops at the side of the road. A Jeep drives up the highway behind it, followed by a bus with a red stripe on its sides. It stops. Ilya and Alex jump out of the BMW and speak to the police officer. Ilya. So where is he? District police officer. In the house. Down by the shore. Address. By opening the folder. District police officer. But he drove up the road, it seems to be to the store. Ilya. That's definitely him. The policeman gave him a strange look and, opening the folder, showed him the photo. Max, who had gotten out of the Jeep, approached. Ilya. What kind of car does he have? District police officer. White Chevrolet. Ilya. He didn't suspect anything. District police officer. No. Shaking his head from side to side. Ilya. You, go ahead and disappear, so you won't be seen. Go to the police station and sit there until I call you personally. You understand me? District police officer. Yes. The policeman rushed to the car. He started the engine, sped off, and drove away. Ilya turned to Alex, who was holding the scroll. Ilya. Map. He hands him a bundle. Ilya takes the card, unfolds it, and places it on the hood of the BMW. Taking out a pen, he clicks and marks the house with a cross. Alex and Max are standing nearby. Ilya. It's your business. Addressing Max. Ilya. Encircle the house, and most importantly, keep the neighboring houses under fire, no matter what happens like last time. Although it's unlikely they've dug an underground tunnel. They sit there confident that they won't be found out. You get the idea. Max. Yes. Max nods. Max. They won't come from the water, you can't get far on a boat. A helicopter was sent from the air to coordinate. We have little information at this time. Alex intervened. Alex. Maybe there's no one else in the house. And if he's alone, how are we supposed to look for the others? He's been after him for the last day, and he'll lead us to the others. And besides, we're not 100% sure of his involvement in this case. Ilya. And I have. Alex looked at Ilya in surprise. Max was silent. Ilya. I visited the guy who refused to talk about the microphone. He saw him on the microphone 5 minutes before we arrived. We won't follow him, he might feel followed and leave, then we'll lose him. And most importantly, why would he rent such a big house and sit there alone? What's the reason? Alex. Don't know. Alex hesitated. Ilya. And I know. Ilya said confidently. Alex. Ilya. Alex tugged at his arm. Alex. I got in touch with him, let me deal with him myself. Ilya. How? Ilya frowned. Max listened in silence, looking from one to the other. Alex. I'll go to him and lead him to the shore, and then I'll provoke him, we'll see what he does. And there will be one less person to capture. Ilya nodded his head, thinking it over, and said. Ilya. Okay. Just don't enter the house, under any circumstances. Yes. Let me know when he's done preparing. Put your best sniper on Alex, keep him at gunpoint, and let him shoot to kill if necessary. And don't talk on the radio, they might have a receiver. Talk on your cell phone. Understood. They nodded their heads. Ilya. Let's. Max rushed to the bus. Alex to the BMW, Ilya went to the Jeep. They drove off. Natural preparation. Day. Cordon. People in green clothes stood around the house. They signal. In front of the house. Neighbors. The doorbell rings. He presses the button. The doors open, they run into the house. Senior. Calm down. SWAT team. We're from the police. We have information that there might be an explosion in the building next door. We need to evacuate you. Do you have a basement? Woman. Yes, of course. What should I do? She asked excitedly. Senior. To the basement. He pointed to one. He pointed to the roof for the other guy. They ran to carry out the order. A group of guys settled down by the windows. Seeing a girl of about 9 years old, he gave instructions. Senior. Our man will take you to your friends or acquaintances. For now, you'll be notified when the operation is complete. And most importantly, don't worry, everything will be fine. Woman. Fine. Senior. Get ready. Woman. Fine. She ran into the room. The boat stopped, rocking in the water. About 6 men in camouflage, weapons in hand, stood frozen inside the cabin. A young man emerged from the wheelhouse wearing swimming trunks and holding a fishing rod. He cast his line and sat down in a chair on the bow of the boat. A helicopter filled with men in camouflage, helmets on their heads, weapons on their laps, was preparing to take off. The man sitting next to the pilot pointed upward. The helicopter lifted off from the airstrip on the outskirts of the city. Nat. Return. Day. Roadside gas station. Cafe. A man of about 45 years old is at the checkout with bags. He is paying. Leader. Thank you. He takes the bags from the counter and heads towards the exit. The doors open and he comes out. Owen walks to the car. He puts down the bags and gets behind the wheel. The car starts moving and turns onto the road. Alex is driving a BMW down the road. A white Ford appears ahead towards. They draw level and pass each other. Alex looks at the man sitting behind the wheel of the Ford. Oh, slow motion. He looks at him. Alex looks away from the road. Looks in the rearview mirror. In a Ford. Back. Ford turns the corner. The car disappears around the corner. Alex brakes sharply and turns onto the road and, straightening out the car, follows the Ford. Nat. Provocation. Day. Home. Evening. Alex drove up to the house. A white Ford was parked near the house. He went out and slammed the door. He stopped. I looked at the house and went to the entrance. Door. I rang the bell. A moment later the door opened. The man stood in the doorway, looking questioningly at Alex. Alex. Excuse me, Alex, assistant investigator, coroner, police. I'd like to talk to you. The chief. Yes, please, come in. He said and moved a little to the side. Alex. No, if possible, let's take a walk along the shore. Without giving the owner of the house a chance to respond, he headed toward the shore. He paused, glanced around, and then left the house. He closed the door and followed. Alex walked to the water's edge and stopped, looking out over it. The man came over and stood next to her, watching the lapping waves. Alex looked at him and began to speak. Alex. I met you on the road, and it seemed to me that I had seen you somewhere before. They look at each other. Alex. Where could I see you? Alex asked. The chief. I have a standard face, everyone thinks they've seen me somewhere before. Alex. No, I approached you at the cafe opposite Bank Rosia when the bank was being robbed. He narrowed his eyes and began to look Alex intently in the eyes. He smiled crookedly. Alex took the radio from his belt and, turning toward the house, took a couple of steps. He raised the radio to his ear and began talking, looking around the house. Alex. Police department. The man yanked a pistol from his belt and, cocking the slide, pointed it at Alex's head. Alex, hearing the click of the slide, lowered his hand holding the radio and lowered his arm. His face was pressed against the barrel of the pistol, his eyes wide. In the distance, in the dense greenery of the foliage, a guy in green overalls held a man with a pistol at gunpoint. Optical sight. The man standing next to Alex fell from a bullet hit in the temple. Alex instantly jumped back toward the overturned boat and snatched his pistol from its holster. Lying under the cover of the boat, I looked towards the house, and then at the man lying on the sand. Nat. Invasion. Evening. An armored car is driving towards the house at high speed. Having arrived at the door, they stop abruptly. 6 men in camouflage uniforms and helmets jumped out of the car. One ran to the door and attached a bomb. He jumped aside. The others were already standing on either side of the door. From the trees, men in camouflage uniforms, carrying automatic weapons, appeared from the back of the house. About 10 men, strung out in a line, approached the house. An explosion went off in front of the door. The guys ran through the gap that had formed in the door. Others started shooting out the windows. Alex heard the explosion. He looked out of the boat and saw a door leading out to the sea. He stood up, bent slightly, and ran toward the house with a pistol in his hand. Those who shot at the windows climbed on top of each other, on their backs, and began jumping into the windows one by one. Alex ran to the door and stood to the side. He fired a couple of shots at the lock. Then he swung the door open. Silence. He burst into the room decisively, holding a pistol in his hand. No one there. He walked, slightly bent at the knees, carefully stepping across the floor towards the closed inner door leading into the house. Inside the house, an explosion was heard in the basement, and it echoed loudly throughout the house. Everyone froze, their faces tense, and suddenly, as if on command, they jumped up from their seats, throwing their bags on the table. They jumped up from their seats, grabbing their bags. Weapons. The doors slid open, their bolts rattling. A tall man slid the bolt back and jumped out. 2 others followed him. Then a girl and a guy. The last one to jump out was the guy who had been watching TV, throwing his bag over his shoulders. Doors. Hall. They ran out into the hall and stopped for a moment, looking around. Smoke began to spread from distant rooms, giving off a bitter taste. The girl covered her mouth with her hand and coughed. After standing for a while, they rushed in different directions. The boy and girl ran to the side door. The doors closed. The room was empty. A long-haired boy ran down the corridor. He ran into a group of people in military uniforms who were approaching him in short bursts. Ohm opened fire. The first one hit the helmet. A crack appeared on the glass. In response, short shots were fired from the machine guns pointed at him. He was thrown back and lay motionless. The 2 ran out into the garage and jumped into the car. The car rushed through the opening garage doors. The car drove off at full speed and was ambushed. There were about 6 people standing, 4 on the sides of the garage and 4 behind the trees with machine guns aimed in their hands. A barrage of fire hit the car's wheels. The car skidded and crashed into the fence. It froze in place. The group slowly began to approach the car with their machine guns pointed. They tried to shoot back from the car. The guy aimed his pistol and fired a couple of shots through the glass. The assault team opened fire with deadly force. One raised his hand. Stop. Everything is quiet. One walked up to the car point blank, looking into the car. Inside. The 2 guys lay silently with their heads thrown back in unnatural positions, riddled with bullets. A guy and a girl were running down the corridor. Suddenly, people in military uniform appeared at the end of the corridor. The guy pushed the girl, opening the side door. She gasped in surprise. Sveta. Oh. Run, run, I said. The guy raised his Uzi and started shooting at the approaching and screaming people in helmets. Special Forces. Put the weapon on the floor. Drop the weapon. Shots rang out in response. And the boy wilted, falling by the door. Alex walked with his knees slightly bent. Shots were heard from the depths of the house. Suddenly he heard the clicking of heels. From the sound, he determined that someone was running in his direction. He glanced at the door handle. It jerked down, and a girl ran into the room with a pistol in her hand. Having run into Alex, I got scared. Alex. Drop the gun. Alex shouted, pointing his gun at her. She jerked the pistol upward, pointing it at Alex. Alex fired. She collapsed to the floor, landing on her side and toppling over slightly. The hem of her dress had ridden up, revealing her calves and the thin thread of her panties. Her dark hair spilled across the floor. Blonde. The pistol lay in the open palm of the hand. Alex sat down on the floor, running his hand wearily over his face. Eyes. A group of people, moving along the wall, burst onto the second floor. They ran up the stairs. A young man was kneeling in the middle of the room, his hands raised. A large caliber automatic rifle lay on the floor in front of him. They ran in and shouted, interrupting each other. Special Forces. Don't move. Two of them walked around him, continuing to aim, and grabbed him by the arms, putting his hands behind his back. They took off the handcuffs, throwing the gun aside. They jerked me off the floor and dragged me toward the door. The two ran upstairs and looked around. Sofas. Around. Nobody. The cards are scattered on the table. The TV is on. Ilya entered after him. Special Forces. Purely. Ilya. Fine. They ran up the stairs. Ilya looked around the room again, more calmly this time. He picked up the remote control from the table and turned off the TV. People in masks ran into the room where Alex was sitting. Alex jerked his hand with the gun and aimed it at those who entered, and then lowered his hand. Ilya followed him in. One leaned towards the girl and put his fingers to her throat. Alex looked at the girl. He nodded to his partner. And together, taking her by the arms and legs, they carried her out of the room. Ilya squatted down and pulled the zipper on his bag. Wads of money. He closed the bag and, taking the bag by the handles, stood up. With a bag in his hands, looking at Alex. Ilya. It's all over. Alex looked at him and stood up from his seat. They silently left the room. We walked along a corridor splattered with blood and broken doors and windows. We went out onto the porch of the house. They stood next to each other. Ilya with a bag in his hand. Alex with a gun. Oh, the camera began to move away, revealing a painting. Review. People in masks and police uniforms. Police cars. Glints of light. People scurrying around. From above, helicopter. Helicopter blades. Sound. Ilya and Alex. End. Turkmenistan. City of Balkanabat Nebet Dag. Block 146, Building 5, Apartment 2. Sayedkulev David Aliberdovich. Home. Telephone. 8222-63849. Mobile. +993 645 69960. Mobile. +993 623 69118. Mail. dawoodc@outlook.com. Mail. dawoodc@gmail.com. Name Triplex. Genre. Police detective. Theme. Bank robbery. Time 1 day. History of cops and thieves.